Sippy sippy. Hello. Sorry about that. I had to change my chair up. I tried to get into it and I completely went ass over tea kettle. Hello. Figured I would give it a minute. See if anybody else comes in. I should probably put a thing in Discord. I'm glad the sound is good. The music's not too loud or anything like that. Okay. I'm glad, because I turned it down a notch and then I accidentally turned it all the way off and then I had to re-find where I was. And I don't know how to do the cool pop out thing that you do in Discord, so I'm just putting the link. Ta-da. There we go. Okay, so it does get quiet behind. That's not too bad then. Well, after the votes came in, it was 5-3 for Moll Flanders being the first one. Ah, okay. That makes sense, though. Alright. And then I should probably take the sippy that you redeemed, oh frog. And then I'm going to make sure that I have my bookmark in case I need it. You're very helpful. Potatoes. Hello, Pilcrow. How are you? Ooh. Hi, Entropy. Sounds good. Thank you for being here. Okay, well, no matter what, I finally remembered to actually record this and hopefully have VODs on, so you're welcome to come back to it later. Alright. Ooh, 8 minutes. I'll take 8 minutes of your time. Happily. So, to start off with, this book was actually from the 1700s, so it is very much a book that does not have chapters, so I'm just kind of going to go while I can, and it's been forever since I read out loud, so I'm hoping it'll be good. Thank you for popping in. And you're a goose. But thank you. I appreciate all the kind words. So, for those who don't know, the book is called Moll Flanders, or its original name was The Fortunes and Misfortunes of the Famous Moll Flanders and Company. It is written by Daniel Defoe. Preface. The world is so taken up of late with novels and romances that it will be hard for a private history to be taken for genuine where the names and other circumstances of the persons are concealed. And on this account we must be content to leave the reader to pass his own opinion upon the ensuing sheets, and take it just as he pleases. The author is here supposed to be writing her own history, and in the very beginning of her account she gives the reasons why she thinks fit to conceal her true name, after which there is no occasion to say any more about that. It's exclamation Coco, if you want to do it. You goose. It is true that the original of this story is put into new words, and the silts of the famous lady we speak of is a little altered. Particularly, she is made to tell her own tale in modester words than she'd told it at first. The copy which came first to hand having been written in languages more like one still in Newgate than one grown penitent and humble, as she afterwards pretends to be. The plan employed in finishing her story and making it what you now see to be has been no little difficulty to put it into a dress fit to be seen, and to make it speak language fit to be read. It didn't go off? Oh. I'm sorry, it should have. It went off on my end. I don't know why it didn't go off on your end. I'll have to figure that out a little later. I wonder why it's not going. This Firebot has the stuff. Anyway, where was I? Excuse me. Oh, I see what's happening. Hold on. These are over top of, so when it goes off, it'll show. Yep, that's what happened. I don't know why Firebot sound didn't go off either. Well, I'll stick that back up. We'll go like that. Maybe now it'll work a little better. He's not here, but somebody just do. Just there. That seemed to work a little. Could you hear the sound? I wonder. Let me try turning the Chrome sound down a little and see if.
Sippy sippy.
That's weird. Big Sip is the one that's the longer one. Hmm. It's okay. I'd rather you spam them. Just tell me which ones you're not hearing so I know. Okay. But Big Sip made a noise? Yes, yes, it did. Okay. Let me see if I can fix these quick. I'm just trying to quick see if maybe I change them back and do them all over, if maybe it'll save them and fix it. But for a hot second, I cannot see stream. Everything went over it. Hmm. I'm just going through quick and I'm just doing all of them. Yeah, some of these are acting like they don't have the files on them and others are. So maybe that is what's happening. Have a good day. We'll see you later. I didn't think I did. That's why it's throwing me off, because I hadn't thought that I'd moved them. Especially after we had all that issue with me moving the pictures. Well, I'm almost done at this point, so it'll just take me another hot second. Okay. All right. I think I did it. I think I fixed it. So we'll see. Anybody's welcome to do the exclamation point commands, and that should give you a list of the commands available. That's weird. My desktop audio went off, but the Firebot audio did not. Yeah, I think it's Firebot because the audio for Firebot is not going off. I'm sorry about that. I should. Monitor and output. I am okay with side quests. Okay. I think that's how I turned it off and on again. Let's see now. Doesn't look like it. Well. Yeah, we will just have to fix it later. People get to see pretty things, and that's about it. It's probably because I made it so that if people follow me on Twitch, now I actually get other things that pop up. It's okay, no sorry. We'll figure it out, I'm sure. Where was I, though? The pen employed in finishing her story and making it what you now see it to be has had no little difficulty to put it into a dress fit to be seen, and to make it speak languages fit to be read. When a woman debauched from her youth, nay, even being the offspring of debauchery and vice, comes to give an account of all her vicious practices, and even to descend to the particular occasions and circumstances by which she first became wicked, and of all the progressions of crime which she ran through in 80 years, An author must be hard put it to wrap it up so clean as to not give room, especially for vicious readers, to turn it into his disadvantage. All possible care, however, has been taken to give no lewd ideas, no immodest turns in the new dressing up of this story. No, not to the worst part of her expressions. To this purpose, some of the vicious parts of her life, which could not be modestly told, is quite left out, and several other parts are very muchly shortened. What is left, 'tis hoped, will not offend the chastest reader or the modest hearer. And as the best hope is to be made, even of the worst story, the moral, 'tis hoped, will keep the reader serious, even when the story might incline him to be otherwise. To give the history of the wicked life repented of necessarily requires that the wickedest part should be made as wicked as the real history of it will bear. To illustrate and give beauty to the penitent part, which is certainly the best and brightest, if related with equal spirit and life, it is suggested there cannot be the same life, the same brightness and beauty, in relating the penitent part, as is in the criminal part. If there is any truth in the suggestion, I must be allowed to say 'tis because there is not the same taste and relish in the reading. And indeed it is too true that the difference lies not in the real world of the subject, so much as in the gust and palate of the reader. But, as this work is chiefly recommended to those who know how to read it, and how to make good the use of it, which the story all along recommends to them, so it is to be, with hope, that such readers will be much more pleased with the moral than the fable, with the application than with the realization, and with the end of the writer than with the life of the person writing it. There is in this story abundance of delightful incidents, and of all of them usefully applied. There is an agreeable turn artfully given them in the relating, that naturally instructs the reader, either one way or another. The first part of her lewd life with the young gentleman at Cochlear has so many happy turns given it to expose the crime and warn all whose circumstances are adapted to it of the ruinous end of such things, and the foolish, thoughtless, and abhorrent conduct of both the parties, that it is abundantly atones for all the lively description she gives of her folly and wickedness, the repentance of her lover at the bath, and how, brought by the just alarm of his fit of sickness to abandon her, the just causation given there against even the lawful intimacies of the dearest friends, and how unable they are to preserve the most solemn resolutions of virtue without divine assistance. These are the parts which, to a just discernment, will appear to have real beauty in them, all the amorous chain of the story which introduces it. In a word, as the whole relation is carefully garbled of all the levity and looseness was in it, so it is applied, with the utmost care, to various and religious uses. None can, without being guilty of manifest injustice, cast any reproach upon it, and upon our design in publishing it. The advocate for the stage have in all ages made this the great argument to persuade people that their plays are useful and that they ought to be allowed in the most civilized and in the most religious government, namely, that they are applied to virtuous purpose, and that by the most lively representations they failed to do recommended virtue and generous principles, and to not discourage and expose all sorts of vice and corruption of manners, and were it true that they did so, and that they constantly adhered to that rule as the test of their acting on the theatre, much might be said of their favour. Thus, we cannot say indeed that this history is carried on quite to the end of the life of this famous Moll Flanders, for nobody can write their own life to the full end of it, unless they can write it after they are dead. But her husband's life being written by a third hand gives a full account of them both, how long they lived together in that country, and how they both came to England again after about 8 years, in which time they were grown very rich, where she'd lived to seem to be very old, but not so extraordinary a penitent as she was at first. It seems only that indeed she always spoke with abhorrence of her former life, and of every part of it. It is in this last scene of Maryland and Virginia many pleasant things happened which make that part of her life very agreeable, but they are not told with the same elegance as those accounted for by herself, so it is still to be more advantageous that we break off here. So basically that was the preface of the authors who reprinted this book because of its original writing, basically saying that they took out some of the things from it because of its lewd and lascivious nature. Hello, Mena. So after that big long preface of very big words, I shall now move on to the very beginning of the book. Also, just so everyone knows, this book does not actually have chapters, so I will read as long as I can. And I don't know, why haven't you? But goodness gracious. Like I was saying, this book does not have chapters, so I will just probably read to the point that I find a good stopping point. I originally had planned on 2 hours. I have a migraine still, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to actually do the whole 2 hours. But I figured, let's see how long I can go. The tale is super cute. The beginning of the book, known as The Fortune and Misfortune of the Famous Moll Flanders, who was born in Newgate, and during a life of continued variety for threescore years, beside her childhood was 12 years a whore, 5 times a wife, whereof once to her own brother, 12 years a thief, 8 years a theftport, felon in Virginia, alaft grew rich, lived onft and dined pennant. My true name is so well known in the records or registries at Newgate, and in the Old Bailey, and there are some things of such consequences still depending there, relating to my particular conduct, that it is not to be expected I should set my name or the account of my family to this work. Perhaps after my death it may be better known. At present it would not be proper, no, not though a general pardon should be issued even without exception of persons or crimes. It is enough to tell you that as some of my worst comrades, who are out of the way of doing me harm, having gone out of the world by steps and by the strings, as I oft expected to go, knew me by the name of Moll Flanders. So you may give me leave to go under that name till I dare my own, who I have been, as well as who I am. I have been told that in one of our neighbors' nations, whether it be France or where else, I know not, they have an order from the king that when any criminal is condemned either to die or to the galleys, or to be transported if they leave any children, as such are generally impoverished, for by then they forfeited of their parents, so they are immediately taken into the care of the government and put into a hospital called the House of Orphans, where they are bred up, clothed, fed, taught, and when fit to go out are placed to trades or to services, so as to be well able to provide for themselves by an honest, industrious behavior. Had this been the custom in our country, had I not been left a poor, desolate girl without friends, without clothes, without help or helpers, as was my fate, and by which I was not only exposed to very great distress, even before I was capable either of understanding my case or how to amend it, but brought into a course of life scandalous in itself, and which it is in ordinary course tended to the swift destruction both of soul and body. But the case was otherwise here. My mother was convicted of felony for a petty theft, scarce worth naming, borrowing 3 pieces of fine Holland off of a certain draper in Cheapside. The circumstances are too long to repeat, and I have heard them related to me in so many ways that I can scarce tell which is the right account. However it was, they all agreed in this, that my mother pleaded her belly, and being found quick with child, she was repised for about 7 months, after which she was called down, as they term it, to her former judgment, but obtained the favor afterwards of being transported to the plantations, and left me about half a year old, and in bad hands, as you may be sure. This is too near the first hours of my life for me to relate anything of myself, but by hearsay. 'Tis enough to mention that as I was born in such an unhappy place, I had no parish to give recourse for my nourishment in my infancy, nor can I give the least account how I was kept alive, other than that, as I have been told, some relation of my mother took me away, but at whose expense or by whose direction I knew nothing of at all. The first account that I can recollect or could ever learn of myself was that I wandered among a crew of those people that they called the gypsies or Egyptians, but I believed it was but a little while that I had been among them, for I had not had my skin discolored, as they do to all children they carry with them, nor can I tell how I came among them or how I got from them. It was at Clocaster in Essex that these people left me, and I have a notion in my head that I left them there. That is, that I hid myself and would not go any farther with them. Excuse me. But I am not able to be particular in that account. Only thus I remember that being taken up by some of the parish officers, I gave an account that I came to town with the gypsies, but that I would not go any farther with them, and that so they had left me. But whether they were gone, that I knew not, for though they sent round the country to inquire after them, it seems they could not be found. I was now in a way to be provided for though I was not a parish charge upon this or that part of the town by law, yet as my case came to be known, and that I was too young to do any work, being not yet above the age of 3, compassion moved the magistrates of the town to take care of me, and I became one of their own, as much as if I'd been born in that place. In the provision they made for me, it was my good happens to be put to nurse, as they called it, to a woman who was indeed poor, but had been in better circumstances, and who got a little livelihood by taking such as I was supposed to be, and keeping them with all necessities, till they were at a certain age in which they might be supposed they might go to service, or get in their own bread. This woman had also a little school, which she kept to teach children to read and to work, and having, I say, lived before in a good fashion, she bred up the children with a great deal of art, as well as with a great deal of care. But which was worth all the rest, she bred them up very religiously also, being herself a very sober and pious woman, very housewifely and very clean and very mannerly and with very good behavior, so that, excepting a plain diet, coarse lodgings, and mean clothes, we were brought up as mannerly as if we'd been at the dancing school. I was continued here till I was 8 years old, when I was terrified with news that the magistrates, as I think they'd called them, had ordered that I should go to service. I was able to do but very little, whatever I was to go, except it was to run of errands and be a drudge to some cook maid. And this they told me often, which put me into a great fright, for I had a thorough aversion to going to service, as they'd called it, though I was so young, and I told my nurse that I believed I could get my living without going to service, if she pleased to let me, for she had taught me to work with my needle and spin worsted, which is the chief trade of that city. I told her that if she would keep me, I would work for her, and I would work very hard. I talked to her almost every day of working hard, and in short, I did nothing but work and cry all day, which grieved the good kind woman so much, that at the last she began to be concerned for me, and she loved me very well. One day after this, as she came into the room where all the poor children were at work, she sat down just over against me, not in her usual place as mistress, but as if she had set herself on purpose to observe me and see my work. I was doing something she had set me to, as I remembered it was making some shirts, which she had taken to make, and after a while she began to talk to me. "Thou foolish child," she said, "thou art always crying," for I was crying then. "Prithee, what dost thou cry for?" "Because they will take me away," say I, "and put me to service, and I can't work housework." "Well, child," she says, "but you canst work housework. You will learn it in time, and they won't put you to hard things at first." "Yes, they will," say I, "and if I can't do it, they will beat me, and the maids will beat me, to make me do great work, and I am but a little girl, and I cannot do it." And then I cried again till I could not speak any more. This moved my good motherly nurse, so that she resolved I should not go to service yet, so she did bid me not to cry, and she would speak to Mr. Mayor, and I should not go to service till I was bigger. I'm taking a sip quick. Well, this did not satisfy me, for to think of going to service at all was such a frightful thing to me, that if she had assured me I should not have gone till I was 20 years old, it would have been the same to me. I should have cried all the time, with the very apprehension of it being to be so at last. When she saw that I was not pacified yet, she began to be angry with me. "And what would you have?" she said. "Don't I tell you that you shall not go to service till you are bigger?" "Aye," says I, "but then I must go at last." "Why, what," says she, "is the girl mad? What, would you be a gentlewoman?" "Yes," says I, and I cry heartily till I roared out again. This set the gentlewoman a-laughing at me, and as you may be sure it would. "Well, madam, forsooth," says she, gibing at me, "you would be a gentlewoman, and how will you come to be a gentlewoman? What will you do with your fingers' ends?" "Yes," says I again, very innocently. "Why, what can you earn?" says she. "What can you get a day at your work?" "3d., say I, when I spin, and 4d. when I work plain work." "Alas, poor gentlewoman," she said again, laughing, "what will that do for thee? it will keep me, says I, if you will let me live with you, and this I said in such a poor petitioning tone that it made the poor woman's heart yearn for me, as she said me afterwards. But, says she, that will not keep you, and buy you clothes, too. And you must buy the little gentlewoman clothes, she says, and smiled all the while at me. I will work harder then, says I, and you shall have it all. Poor child, I won't keep you, said she. It will hardly find you in victuals. Then I would have no victuals, says I again, very innocently. Let me but live with you. Why, can you live without victuals? Says she. Yes, again, says I, very much like a child. You may be sure, and still I cried heartily. I had no policy in all of this. You may easily see it was all nature, but it was joined with so much innocence and so much passion, that in short it set the good motherly creature to weeping too. And at last she'd cried as fast as I did, and then took me and led me out of the teaching room. Come, says she, you shan't go to service, you shall live with me, and this pacified me for the present. After this she's going to wait on the mare. My story came up, and my good nurse told Mr. Mayor the whole tale. He was so pleased with it that he would call his lady and his 2 daughters to hear it, and it made mirth enough among them that you may be sure. However, not a week had passed over, but on a sudden comes Mrs. Mayoress and her 2 daughters to the house to see my old nurse, and to see her school and the children. When they had looked about them a little, well, Mrs. Blank, says the Mayoress to my nurse, and pray, which is the little lass that is to be a gentlewoman, I hear her? And I was terrifiably frightened, though I did not know why neither. But Mrs. Mayoress came up to me. Well, miss, says she, and what are you to work upon? The word miss was a language that had hardly been heard in our school, and I wonder what sad name it was that she'd called me. However, I stood up, made a curtsy, took my work out of my hand, looked on it, and said it was very well. Then she looked upon one of my hands. Nay, she may come to be a gentlewoman, she says. For aught I know, she has a lady's hands, I assure you. This pleased me mightily, but Mrs. Mayoress did not stop there, but put her hand in her pocket, gave me a shilling, and bid me to mind my work and learn to work well, and I might be a gentlewoman for aught she know. All this while the good old nurse, Mrs. Mayoress, and all the rest of them did not understand me at all, for they meant one sort of thing by the word gentlewoman, and I meant another, quite another. For alas, all I understood by being a gentlewoman was to be able to work for myself and get enough to keep me without going to service, whereas they meant to live great and high, and I know not what. Well, and after Mrs. Mayoress has gone, her 2 daughters came in, and they'd called for the gentlewoman too. They'd talked a long while to me, and I answered them in my innocent way, but always they'd ask me whether I resolved to be a gentlewoman. I'd answer yes. At last they'd ask me what a gentlewoman was. That puzzled me much, however. I explained myself negatively that it was one that did not go to service to do housework. They were mightily pleased, and liked my little prattle to them, which it seems was agreeable enough to them, and they gave me money too. As for my money, I gave it all to my mistress nurse, as I called her, and told her she should have it all, and all that I got when I was a gentlewoman, as well as now. By this and by some other of my talk, my old tutoress began to understand what I meant by being a gentlewoman, and that it was no more than to be able to get my bread by my own work. And at last she'd asked me whether it was not so. I told her yes, and insisted on it, that to do so was to be a gentlewoman, for, says I, there is such a one, naming a woman that mended lace and washed the ladies' laced heads. She, says I, is a gentlewoman, and they called her madam. Poor child, says my good old nurse, you may soon be such a gentlewoman as that, for she is a person of ill fame and has had 2 bastards. I did not understand anything of that, but I answered, I am sure they call her madam, and she does not go to service nor do housework, and therefore I insisted that she was a gentlewoman, and I would be such a gentlewoman as that. Awoo! The ladies were told all this again, and they made themselves merry with it, and every now and then Mr. Mayor's daughters would come and see me, and ask where the little gentlewoman was, which made me not a little proud of myself. Besides, I was very often visited by these young ladies, and sometimes they brought others with them, so that I was known by it almost all over the town. I was now about 10 years old, and began to look a little womanish, for I was mighty grave, very mannerly, and as I had often heard the ladies say, I was pretty and would be very handsome. You may be sure it made me not a little proud. However, that pride had no ill effect upon me yet, only as they often gave me money, and I gave it to my old nurse. She, honest woman, was so just as to lay it out again for me, and gave me headdresses and linens and gloves, and I went very neat. For if I had rags on, I would always be clean, or else I would dabble them in the water myself. But I say my good nurse, when I had money given me, very honestly laid it out for me, and would always tell the ladies this or that was bought with their money, and this made them give me more, till at last I was indeed called upon by the magistrates to go out to service. But then I was become so good a workswoman myself, and the ladies were so kind to me, that I was past it, for I could earn as much for my nurse as was to keep me. So she told them that if they would give her leave, she would keep the gentlewoman, as she called me, to be her assistant, and teach the children, which I was very well able to do, for I was very nimble at my work, though I was yet very young. But the kindness of the ladies did not end here, for when they understood that I was no more maintained by the town as before, they gave me more money oftener, and as I grew up, they brought me work for them, such as linens to make, lace to mend, and heads to dress up, and not only paid me for doing them, but even taught me how to do them, so that I was a gentlewoman indeed, as I understood that word. For before I was 12 years old, I not only found myself clothed and paid my nurse for my keeping, but got money in my pocket as well. The ladies also gave me clothes frequently, as of their own or their children's, some stockings, some petticoats, some gowns, some one thing, some another, and these my old woman managed for me like a mother, and kept them for me, obliged me to mend them and turn them into the best advantage, for she was a rare housewife. At last one of the ladies took such a fancy to me that she would have me to her home, for a month, she said, to be among her daughters. Now though this was exceedingly kind in her, yet as my good woman said to her, unless she resolved to keep me for good and all, she would do the little gentlewoman more harm than good. Well, says the lady, that's true. I only take her home for a week then, that I may see how my daughters and she agree, and how I like her temper, and then I'll tell you more. And in the meantime, if anybody comes to see her as they used to do, you may only tell them you have sent her out to my house. This was prudently managed enough, and I went to the lady's house. But I was so pleased there with the young ladies, and that they were pleased with me, that I had enough to do to come away, and they were unwilling to part with me. However, I did come away, and lived almost a year more with my honest old woman, and began now to be very helpful for her. For I was almost 14 years old, and was tall for my age, and looked a little womanish. But I had such a taste of genteel living at the lady's house that I was not so easy in my old quarters as I used to be. and I thought it was fine to be a gentlewoman indeed, for I had quite other notions of a gentlewoman now than I'd had before. And as I thought that it was fine to be a gentlewoman, so I loved to be among gentlewomen, and therefore I longed to be there again. When I was about 14 years old and a quarter, my good old nurse, mother I ought to call her, fell sick and died. I was then in a sad condition indeed, for there is no great bustle in putting to an end to an old body's family. When once they are carried to the grave, so the poor good woman being buried, the parish children were immediately removed by the church wardens, the school was at an end, and the day children with it had no more to do but just stay at home till they were sent somewhere else. As for what she left, a daughter, a married woman, came and swept it all away, and removing the goods, they had no more to say to me than to jest with me, and tell me that the little gentlewoman might set up for herself if she pleased. I was frightened out of my wits almost, and knew not what to do, for I was, as it were, turned out of the doors to the wide world, and that which was still worse, the old honest woman had 22 shillings of mine in her hand, which was all the estate the little gentlewoman had in the world, and when I'd asked the daughter for it, she huffed me and told me she had nothing to do with it. It was true the good poor woman had told her daughter of it, and that it lay in such a place, that it was the child's money, and had called once or twice for me to give it back. But I was unhappily out of the way, and when I came back she was past being in a condition to speak of it. However, the daughter was so honest afterwards as to give it to me, though at first she'd used me cruelly about it. Now was I a poor gentlewoman indeed, and was just that very night to be turned into the wide world, for the daughter removed all the goods, and I had not so much as a lodging to go to or a bit of bread to eat, but it seemed some of the neighbours took so much compassion of me as to acquaint the lady in whose family I had been, and immediately she sent her maid to fetch me, and away I went with them, bag and baggage, and with a glad heart, you may be sure. The fright of my condition had made such an impression upon me that I did not now want to be a gentlewoman, but was very willing to be a servant, and that any kind of servant they thought fit to be, I would be. But my new generous mistress had better thoughts for me. I called her generous, for she exceeded the good woman I was with before in everything, as in estate, I say, in everything except honesty. For that, though this was a lady most exactly just, yet I must not forget to say on all occasions that the first, though poor, was as uprightly honest as it was possible. I was no sooner carried away, as I have said, by this good gentlewoman, but the first lady, that is to say, the mayoress that was, sent her daughters to take care of me, and another family which had taken notice of me when I was the little gentlewoman sent for me after her, so that I was mightily made of. Nay, they were not a little angry, especially the mayoress, that her friend had taken me away from her, for as she said, I was hers by right, she having been the first that took any notice of me. But they had me, would not part with me, and as for me, I could not be better than where I was. Here I continued till I was between 17 and 18 years old, and here I had all the advantages of my education that could be imagined. The lady had masters home to teach her daughters to dance and to speak French and to write, and others to teach them music, and as I was always with them, I learned as fast as they, and though the masters were not appointed to teach me, yet I learned by intimidation, and inquiry, all that they learned by instruction and direction. So that, in short, I learned to dance and speak French as well as any of them, and to sing much better, for I had a better voice than any of them. I could not so readily come at playing the harpsichord or spinet, because I had no instrument of my own to practice on, and could only come at theirs in the intervals where they had left it. But yet I learned tolerably well, and the young ladies at length got 2 instruments, that is to say, a harpsichord and a spinet too. Then they taught me themselves, but as to dancing, they could hardly help my learning country dances, because they always wanted me to make up even number, and on the other hand, they were as heartily willing to learn me everything that they had been taught themselves as I could be to take to the learning. Big stretch. By this means, I had, as I have said, all the advantages of education that I could have had if I had been as much of a gentlewoman as they were, with whom I'd lived. And in some things I had the advantage of my ladies, though they were my superiors, that mine were all the gifts of nature, and which all their fortunes could not furnish. First, I was apparently handsomer than any of them. Secondly, I was better shaped, and thirdly, I sung better, by which I mean I had a better voice, in all which you will, I hope, allow me to say I do not speak my own conceit, but the opinion of all that knew the family. I had with all these the common vanity of my sex, that has been taken for very handsome, or if you please for a great beauty. I very well knew it, and had as good an opinion of myself as anybody else could have of me. And particularly I loved to hear anybody speak of it, which happened often, and was a great satisfaction to me. Thus far, I have had a smooth story to tell of myself, and all in this part of my life. I not only had the reputation of living in a very good family, and a family noted and respected everywhere for virtue and sobriety, and for valuable things, but I had the character too of a very sober, modest, and virtuous young woman, and such I had always been. Neither had I yet any occasion to think of anything else, or to know what a temptation to wickedness meant. But that which I was too vain of was my ruin, or rather, my vanity was the cause of it. The lady of the house where I was had 2 sons, young gentlemen of extraordinary parts and behaviors, and it was my misfortune to be very well with both of them, but they managed themselves with me in a quiet, different manner. The eldest, a gay gentleman that knew the town as well as the country, and though he had levity enough to do an ill-natured thing, yet had too much judgment of things to pay too dear for his pleasures. He began with that unhappy snare to all women, taking notice upon all occasions how pretty I was, as he called it, how agreeable, how well carriaged, and the like, and this he contrived so subtly, as if he had known as well how to catch a woman in his net as a partridge when he went a-setting. For he would contrive to be taking this to his sisters, when, though I was not by, yet when he knew I was, not so far off, but that I should be sure to hear him, his sisters would return softly to him, "Hush, brother, she will hear you. She is but in the next room." Then he would put it off, and talk softlier, as if he had not known it, and began to acknowledge he was wrong. And then, as if he had forgot himself, he would speak aloud again, and I, that was so well pleased to hear it, was so sure to listen. for it upon all occasions. Hello, Dash. Welcome, welcome. I'm just reading. After he had thus baited his hook and found easily enough the method. That moment, the firebot is not working for anybody else but me, so I'm the only one hearing these. After he had thus baited his hook and found easily enough the method how to lay it in my way, he'd played an open game, and one day, going by his sister's chamber, when I was there, he came in with an air of gaiety. "Oh, Mrs. Betty," he'd say to me. "How do you do, Mrs. Betty? Don't your cheeks burn, Mrs. Betty?" I made a courtesy, and I blushed, but said nothing. "What makes you talk so, brother?" said the lady. "Why," says he, "we have been talking of her below stairs this hour half." "Well," says his sister, "you can say no harm of her, that I am sure, so 'tis no matter what you have been talking about. Nay," says he, "'tis so far from talking harm of her that we have been talking a great deal of good, and a great many fine things have been said of Mrs. Betty, I assure you, and particularly that she is the handsomest young woman in the cloister. And in short, they began to toast her health in the town. I wonder at you, brother," says the sister. "Betty wants but one thing, but she had a good want everything, for the market is against our sex just now, and if a young woman has beauty, birth, breeding, wit, sense, manner, modesty, and all of to an extreme, yet if she has no money, she's nobody. She had a good want them all. Nothing but money now recommends a woman. The men play the game all into their own hands." Is my music gone? It shouldn't be gone. It's still playing on my end. Can you hear it now? I turned it up. Oh no. My things are scuffing. Everything is scuffing. Well, you know what? Can you hear it now? That's what I just did. Can you hear it once I turned the desktop on? Well, I turned the desktop audio, so hopefully you guys can hear it now. Here, I will turn it up just a little clicky.
Stop it! Bear! 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 You're breaking it! You're breaking my kayak! Why are you doing that?
Can you hear them now? I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you. I'm gonna take a sip because I'm actually getting really thirsty again.
All hail the reign of frogs.
Hello, my baby. Hello, my honey. Hello, my ragtime gal. Send me a kiss by wire. Baby, my heart's on fire.
Wahaha. Alright, I will continue now that we've figured out the scuff for the hot moment. Her younger brother, who was by, cried, "Hold, sister, you run too fast. I am an exception to your rule. I assure you, if I find a woman so accomplished as you talk of, I won't trouble myself about the money. Oh, say the sister. But you will take care not to fancy one then, without the money." "You don't know that neither," says the brother. "But why, sister?" says the elder brother. "Why do you exclaim so about the fortune? You are none of them that want a fortune, but whatever else you want." "I understand you, brother," replies the lady very smartly. "You suppose I have the money and want the beauty, but as time goes now, the first will do, so I have the better of my neighbors." "Well," says the younger brother, "but your neighbors may be even with you, for beauty will steal a husband sometimes in spite of money, and when the maid chances to be handsomer than the mistress, she oftentimes makes as good a market, and rides in a coach better for her. I thought it was time for me to withdraw, and did so, but not so far but that I heard all their discourse, in which I heard abundance of fine things said of myself, which prompted my vanity, but as soon as I found was not the way to increase my interest in the family, for the sister and the younger brother fell grievously out about it. And as he said some very disobliging things to her upon my account, so I could easily see that she resented them by her future conduct to me, which indeed was very unjust, for I had never had the least thought of what she suspected as to her younger brother. Indeed, the eldest brother, in his distant, remote way, had said a great many things as in jest, which I had the folly to believe were in earnest, or to flatter myself with the hope of what I ought to have supposed he'd never intend. It happened one day that he came running upstairs towards the room where his sisters used to sit and work, as he often used to do, and calling to them before he came in, as was his way to do. I, being there alone, stepped to the door and said, "Sir, the ladies are not here. They are walked down to the gardens." As I stepped forward to say this, he had just got to the door, and clasping me in his arms, as if he'd been by chance, "Oh, Mrs. Betty," he says, "are you here? That's better. Still, I want to speak with you more than I do with them." And then, having me in his arms, he kissed me 3 or 4 times. I struggled to get away, and yet did it but faintly neither, and he held me fast and still kissed me, till he was out of breath, and sitting down, he said, "Dear Betty, I am in love with you." His words, I must confess, fired my blood, as my spirits flew about my heart, and put me into the disorder enough. I gotta turn this down just a tiny hair, it's a little loud on my end. All my spirits flew about my heart and put me into disorder enough. He repeated it afterwards several times that he was in love with me, and my heart spoke as plain as a voice that I'd liked it. Nay, whenever he said it, "I am in love with you," my blushes plainly replied, "Would you were, sir." However, nothing else passed at the time. It was but a surprise, and I soon recovered myself. He had stayed longer with me, but he happened to look out the window and see his sisters coming up the garden, so he took his leave, kissed me again, told me he was very serious, and I should hear more of him very quickly. And away he went, infinitely pleased, and had there not been one misfortune in it, I had been in the right, but the mistake lay here, that Mrs. Betty was in earnest, and the gentleman was not. From this time my head run upon strange things, and I may truly say I was not myself, to have such a gentleman talk to me of being in love with me. of my being such a charming creature, as he told me I was. There were things I knew not how to bear. My vanity was elevated to the last degree. It is true, I had my head full of pride, but knowing nothing of the wickedness of the time, I had not one thought of my virtue about me, and had my younger master offered it at first sight, he might have taken any liberty he thought fit with me. But he did not see his advantage, which was my happiness for that time. It was not long, but he found an opportunity to catch me again, and almost in the same posture. Indeed, it had more of a design to it on his part, though not on my part. It was thus the young ladies were gone a-visiting with their mother. His brother was out of town, and as for his father, he had been at London for a week before. He had so well watched me that he knew where I was, though I did not so much as know that he was in the house. And he briskly came up the stairs, and seeing me at work, comes into the room to me directly, and began just as he did before, with taking me into his arms and kissing me for almost a quarter of an hour together. It was his younger sister's chamber, and I was in, and as there was nobody in the house but the maids below stairs, he was, it may be, the ruder. In short, he began to be in earnest with me indeed. Perhaps he found me a little too easy, for I made no resistance to him. Well, he only held me in his arms and kissed me. Indeed, I was too well pleased with it to resist him much. Well, tired with that kind of work, we sat down, and there he talked with me a great while. He said that he was charmed with me, and that he could not rest till he had told me how he was in love with me, and that if I could love him again and would make him happy, I should be the saving of his life, and many such fine things. I said little to him again, but easily discovered that I was a fool, and that I did not in the least perceive what he meant. Then he walked about the room, and taking me by the hand, I walked with him, and by the by, taking his advantage, he threw me down upon the bed, and kissed me the most violently. But to give him his due, offered no manner of rudeness to me, only kissed me a great while. After this, he thought he had heard somebody come up the stairs, so he got off from the bed, lifted me up, professing a great deal of love for me, but told me it was all in honest affection, and that he had meant no ill to me, and with that put 5 guineas into my hand, and went down the stairs. I was more confounded with the money than I was before with the love, and began to be so elevated that I scarce knew the ground I stood on. I am the more particular in this, that if it comes to be read by any innocent young body, they may learn from it to guard themselves against the mischief which attend an early acknowledgment of their own beauty. If a young woman once thinks herself handsome, she never doubts the truth of any man that tells her he is in love with her. For if she believes herself charming enough to captivate him, 'tis natural to expect the effects of it. This gentleman had now, for his inclination, as much as had my vanity, and as if he had found that he had an opportunity, and was sorry he did not take hold of it, he came up again in half an hour, and falls to work with me again just as he did before, only with a little less introduction. At first, when he entered the room, he turned about and shut the door. "Mrs. Betty," he said, "I fancied before somebody was coming upstairs, but it was not now. So, however," adds he, "if they find me in the room with you, they shan't catch me a-kissing you." I told him I did not know who should be coming upstairs, for I believed there was nobody in the house but the cook and the other maid, and they never come up those stairs. "Well, my dear," he says, "'tis good, to be sure, however." And so he sits down, and we begin to talk. And now, though I was still on fire with his first visit, and said little, he did, as it were, put words in my mouth. telling me how passionately he loved me, and that though he could not till he came to his estate, yet he was resolved to make me happy then, and himself too, that is to say, to marry me, and an abundance of such things, which I, poor fool, did not understand the drift of, but acted as if they were no kind of love, but that which tended to matrimony, and if he had spoken of that, I had had no room, as well as no power, to have said no. But we were not come to that length yet. We had not sat long, but had got up and stopping my very breath with kisses. Threw me upon the bed again, but then he went further with me than decency permits me to mention, nor had it been in my power to have denied him in that moment. Had he offered much more than that, he did. However, though he took those freedoms with me, it did not go to that which they call the last forever, the last favor, which, to do him justice, he did not attempt, and he made that self-denial of his a plea for all of his freedom with me upon other occasions after this. When this was over, he'd stay put a little while, but he'd put a handful of gold in my hand, and left me 1,000 protestations of his passion for me, and of his loving me above all other women in the world. It will not be strange if I now begin to think, but alas, it was but very little solid reflection. I had a most unbounded stock of vanity and pride, and but a little stock of virtue. I did indeed cast something with myself what my young master aimed at, but thought of nothing but the fine words and gold. Whether he intended to marry me or not seemed a matter of no great consequences to me, nor did I so much as think of making any copulations for myself till he made a kind of formal proposal to me, as you shall hear presently. Thus I gave up myself to ruin without the least concern, and I am fair memento to all young women whose vanity prevails over their virtue. Nothing was ever so stupid on both sides. Had I acted as became me, and resisted as virtue and honor required, he had neither destined his attacks, finding no room to expect the end of his design, or had made fair and honorable proposal of marriage, in which case, whoever blamed him, nobody could have blamed him. In short, if he'd known me, and how easy the trifle he'd aimed at was to be him, to be had, he would have troubled his head no farther, but have given me 4 or 5 guineas, and had lain with me the next time he'd come to me. On the other hand, if I had known his thoughts, and how hard he supposed I would have be to be gained, I might have made my own terms. And if I had not capulated for an immediate marriage, I might for a maintenance till marriage, and might have had what I would, for he was rich to excess, besides what he had in expectation. But I had wholly abandoned all such thoughts, and was taken up only with pride of my beauty, and of being beloved by such a gentleman. As for the gold, I spent whole hours in looking upon it. I told the guineas over 1,000 times a day. Never poor vain creature was so wrapped up with every part of a story as I was, not considering what was before me, and how near my ruin was at the door, and indeed, I think I rather wished for that ruin than studied to avoid it. In the meantime, however, I was cunning enough not to give the least room to any in the family to imagine that I had the least correspondence with him. I scarce even looked toward him in the public, or answered if he spoke to me, when, but for all that, we had every now and then a little encounter, where we had room for a word or two, and now and then a kiss, but no fair opportunity for the mischief intended, and especially considering that he made more circumlocutions than he had occasion for, and the work appearing difficult to him, He really made it so. But as the devil is an unwearied tempter, so he never failed to find an opportunity for the wickedness he invites to. It was one evening that I was in the garden with his 2 younger sisters and himself when he found means to convey a note into my hand, by which he told me that he would tomorrow desire me publicly to go of an errand for him, and that I should see him somewhere by the way. Accordingly, after dinner, he very gravely said to me, his sister being all by, "Mrs. Betty, I must ask a favor of you." "What's that?" said the second sister. "Nay, sister," says he, very gravely, "if you can't spare Mrs. Betty today, any other time will do." Yes, they said they could spare her well enough, and the sister begged pardon for asking. "Well, but," says the eldest sister, "you must tell Mrs. Betty what it is, if it is to be in any private business that we must not hear. You may call her out there. She is." "Why, sister," says the gentleman, very gravely, "what do you mean? I only desire her to go into the High Street," and then he pulls out a turnover, "to such a shop," and then he tells them a long story of 2 fine neckcloths he had bid money for, and he wanted to have me go and make an errand to buy a neck to that turnover that he showed, and if they would not take my money for the neckcloths, to bid a shilling more and haggle with them, and then made more errands, and so continued to have such a petty business to do that I should be sure to stay a good while. When he had given me my errands, he told them a long story of a visit he was going to make to a family they all knew, and where and where was to be such and such gentleman, and very formally asked his sisters to go with him, and they as formally excused themselves because of company that they had noticed was to come and visit them that afternoon. All which, by the way, he had contrived on purpose. He had scarce done speaking, but his man came to tell him that Sir W.H.'s coach stopped at the door, so he runs down, comes up again immediately. "Alas," says he aloud, "there's all the mirth spoiled at once. Sir W. has sent his coach for me, and desires to speak with me, it seems." This Sir W. was a gentleman who lived about 3 miles off, to whom he had spoken on purpose to lend him his carriage for a particular occasion, and had appointed it to call for him as it did about 3 o'clock. Immediately he calls for his best wig, hat, and sword, and ordered his man to go to the other place to make his excuse, that was to say, he made an excuse to send his man away. He prepares to go to the coach. As he was going, he'd stopped a while, and speaks mightily earnestly to me about his business, and finds an opportunity to say very softly, "Come away, my dear, as soon as ever you can." I said nothing, but made a curtsy, as if I had done so to what he said in public. In about a quarter of an hour I went out too. I had no dress other than before, except that I had a hood, a mask, a fan, and a pair of gloves in my pocket, so that there was not the least suspicion in the house. He waited for me in the back lane, which he knew I must pass by, and the coachman knew whither to go, which was a certain place called Mill's End, where lived a confidant of his, where we went in, and where was all the convenience in the world to be as wicked as we pleased. When we were together, he began to talk very gravely to me and tell me he did not bring me there to betray me, that his passion for me would not suffer him to abuse me, that he resolved to marry me as soon as he came to his estate, that in the meantime, if I would grant his request, he would maintain me very honourably, and made me 1,000 protestations of his sincerity and of his affection for me, and that he would never abandon me, and, as I may say, made 1,000 more preambles than needs to have been done. However, as he pressed me to speak, I told him I had no reason to question the sincerity of his love to me, after so many protestations, and there I'd stopped. as if I left him to guess the rest. But what, my dear, says he, I guess what you mean. What if you should be with child? Is not that it? Why then, say he, I'll take care of you and provide for you and the child too. And that you may see I am not in jest, says he, here's an earnest for you. And with that he pulls out a silk purse with 100 guineas in it and gave it to me. And I'll give you such another, says he, every year till I marry you. My colour came and went at the sight of the purse, and with the fire of his proposal together, so that I could not say a word. And he easily perceived it, so putting the purse into my bosom, I made no more resistance to him, but let him do just what he'd pleased, and as often as he'd pleased, and thus I finished my own destruction at once. For from this day, being forsaken of my virtue and my modesty, I had nothing of value left to recommend me, either to God's blessing or man's assistance. But things did not end here. I went back to the town, did the business he directed me to, and was at home before anybody thought me long. As for my gentleman, he stayed out till late at night, and there was not the least suspicion in the family, either on his account or on mine. We had after this frequent opportunities to repeat our crime, and especially at home when his mother and the young ladies went abroad a-visiting, which he'd watched so narrowly as never to miss, knowing always beforehand when they went out, and then failed not to catch me all alone and securely enough, so that we took our fill of our wicked pleasures for nearly half a year, and yet, which was the most to my satisfaction, I was not with child. But before this half year was expired, his younger brother, of whom I have made some mention in the beginning of the story, falls to work with me, and finding me alone in the garden one evening, begins a story of the same kind of love to me, made good honest professions of being in love with me, and in short proposed fairly and honourably to marry me. I was now confounded and driven to such an extremity as the like was never known to me. I resisted the proposal with obstinacy, and began to arm myself with argument. I laid before him the inequality of the match, the treatment I should meet with in the family, the ingratitude in which it would be to his good father and mother who had taken me into their house upon such generous principle, and when I was in such a low condition, and in short, I said everything to dissuade him that I could imagine, except telling him the truth, which would have indeed put an end to it all, but that I durst not think of mentioning. But here happened a circumstance that I did not expect indeed, which put me into my shifts. For this young gentleman, as he was plain and honest, so he pretended to nothing but what was so too, and knowing his own innocence, he was not so careful to make his having a kindness for Mrs. Betty as secret in the house as his brother was. And though he did not let them know that he had talked to me about it, yet he said enough to let his sisters perceive he'd love me, and his mother saw it too, which though they took no notice of to me, yet they did to him. Immediately I found their carriage to me altered more than ever before. I saw the cloud. Though I did not foresee the storm, it was easy, I say, to see their carriage was altered, and that it grew worse and worse every day, till at last I got information that I should in a very little while be desired to remove. I was not alarmed at the news, having a full satisfaction that I should be provided for, and especially considering that I had reason every day to expect I should be with child, and that then I should be obliged to remove without any pretence for it. After some time the younger gentleman took an opportunity to tell me that the kindness he had for me got vent in the family. He did not charge me with it, he said, for he knew well enough which way it came out. He told me his way of talking had the occasion of it, for that he did not make his respect for me so much a secret as he might have done, and the reason was that he was at a point that if I would consent to have him, he would tell them all openly that he loved me and that he intended to marry me. That it was true his father and mother might resent it and be unkind, but he was now in a way to live, being bred to the law, and he did not fear maintaining me, and that, in short, as he believed I would not be ashamed of him, so he would resolve not to be ashamed of me, and that he'd scorn to be afraid to own me now, who he resolved to own after I was his wife, and therefore I had nothing to do but give him my hand, and he would answer for all the rest. I was now in a dreadful condition indeed, and now I repented heartily my uneasiness with the elder brother, not from any reflection of conscience, for I was a stranger to those things, but I could not think of being a whore to one brother and a wife to the other. It came also into my thoughts that the first brother had promised to make me his wife when he came to his estate, but I presently remembered what I had often thought of, that he had never spoken a word of having me for a wife after he had conquered me for a mistress. And indeed, till now, though I said I thought of it often, yet it gave no disturbance at all. For as he did not seem in the least to loosen his affections to me, so neither did he lessen his bounty, though he had the discretion himself to desire me not to lay out a penny in cloths, or to make the least show extraordinary, because it would necessarily give jealousy in the family, since everybody knew I could come at such things in no manner of ordinary ways, but by some privileged friendship which they would presently have suspected. I was now in a great strait, and knew not what to do. The main difficulty was this: the younger brother not only laid close siege to me, but suffered it to be seen. He would come into his sister's room and his mother's room, and sit down and talk 1,000 kind things to me, even before their faces, so that the whole house talked of it, and his mother reproved him for it, and their carriage to me appeared quite altered. In short, his mother had let fall some speeches as if she intended to put me out of the family, that is, in English, to turn me out of doors. Now I was sure this could not be a secret to his brother, only that he might think, as indeed nobody else did, that the youngest brother had made any proposal to me about it. But as I easily could see that it would go further, so I saw likewise there was an absolute necessity to speak of it to him, and that he would speak of it to me, but knew not whether I should break it to him or let it alone till he should see to break it to me. Upon serious consideration, for indeed now I began to consider things very seriously, and never till now, I resolved to tell him of its very first. And it was not long before I had an opportunity, for the very next day his brother went to London upon some business, and the family was out visiting, just as it had happened before, and was, as indeed was often the case when it came according to his custom to spend an hour or two with Mrs. Betty. When he had sat down a while, he had perceived there was an alteration in my countenance, that I was not so free and pleasant with him as I used to be, and particularly that I had been crying. He was not long before he took notice of it, and asked me in very kind terms what was the matter, and if anything troubled me. I would have put it off if I could, but it was not to be concealed, so after suffering many inopportunities to draw that out of me, which I longed as much as possible to disclose, I told him that it was true. Something did trouble me, and something of such a nature that I could not hardly conceal from him, and yet that I could not tell how to tell him of it neither, that it was a thing that not only surprised me but greatly perplexed, and that I knew not what course I should take, unless he would direct me. He told me with great tenderness, let it be what it would, I should not let it trouble me, for he would protect me from all the world. I then began at some distance, and told him I was afraid the ladies had got some secret information of our correspondence, for that it was easy to see that their conduct was very much changed towards me, and that now it was come to pass that they frequently found fault with me, and sometimes fell quite out with me, though I never gave them the least occasion, that whereas I used always to lie with the eldest sister, I was likely put to lie by myself, or with one of the maids, and that I had overheard them several times talking very unkindly about me. But that which confirmed it all was that one of the servants had told me that she had heard I was to be turned out, and that it was not safe for the family that I should be any longer in the house. He smiled when he heard of this, and I asked him how he could make so light of it, when he need know that if there was any discovery I was undone, and that it would hurt him though not ruin him as it would me. I upbraided him that he was not like the rest of his sex, that when they had the character of a woman at their mercy, oftentimes made it their jest, and at least looked upon it as a trifle, and counted the ruin of those that they had their will of as a thing of no value. He saw me warm and serious, and he changed his style immediately. He told me he was sorry I should have such a thought of him, that he had never given me the least occasion for it, but had been as tender as my reputation as he could be of his own, that he was sure our correspondence had been managed with so much address that not one creature in the family had so much as a suspicion of it, that if he smiled when I told him my thoughts, it was that the assurance he'd lately received that our understanding one another was not so much as guessed at, and that when he told me how much reason he had to be easy, I should smile as he did, for he was very certain would give me full satisfaction. This is a misery I cannot understand, says I, or how it should be to my satisfaction that I am to be turned out of doors. For if our correspondence is not discovered, I know not what else I have done to change the faces of the whole family to me, who formerly used me with such tenderness as if I had been one of their own children. Why, look you child, says he, that they are uneasy about you, that is true, but that they have the least suspicion of the case is that, as it is, and as it respects you and I, it is far from being true as they suspect my brother Robin. And in short, they are fully persuaded he makes love to you. Nay, the fool has put it into their heads to himself, for he is continually bantering them about it, and making a jest of himself. I confess I think he is wrong to do so, because he cannot see it vexes them, and makes them unkind to you, but 'tis a satisfaction to me because of the assurance it gives me that they do not suspect me in the least, and I hope this will be to your satisfaction too. So it is, says I, one way, but this does not reach my case at all, nor is this the chief thing that troubles me, though I have been concerned about that too. What is it then, says he, with which I fell into tears, and could say nothing to him at all. He strove to pacify me as he could, but began at last to be very pressing upon me, to tell me it was. At last I answered that I thought I ought to tell him too, and that he had some right to know it, besides that I wanted his direction in the case, for I was in such perplexity that I knew not what course to take. And then I related the whole affair to him. I told him how imprudently his brother had managed himself in making himself so public, for that if he had kept it a secret, I could but have denied him positively, without giving any reason for it, and he would have in time have ceased his solicitations, but that he had the vanity first to depend upon it that I would not deny him, and then had taken the freedom to tell his design to the whole house. I told him how far I had resisted him, and how sincere and honorable his offers were, but said I, my case will be doubly hard, for as they carry it ill for me now, because he desires to have me, they'll carry it worse when they shall find I have denied him. and they will presently say there's something else in it, and that I am married already to somebody else, or that I would never refuse a match so much above my station and such as this. This discourse surprised him indeed very much. He told me that it was a critical point indeed for me to manage, and he did not see which way I should get out of it, but he would consider it, and let me know next time we meet what resolution he had come about. And in the meantime desired I would not give my consent to his brother, nor yet give him flat denial, but that I would hold him in suspense a while. I seemed to start at his saying I should not give him my consent. I told him he knew very well I had no consent to give, that he had engaged himself to marry me, and that I was thereby engaged to him, that he had all along told me I was his wife, and I looked upon myself as effectually so as if ceremony had passed, and that it was from his own mouth that I did so, he having all along persuaded me to call myself his wife. Well, my dear, says he, don't be concerned at that now. If I am not your husband, I'll be as good as a husband to you, and do not let those things trouble you now. But let me look a little farther into this affair, and I shall be able to say more the next time we meet. He pacified me as well as he could with this, but I found he was very thoughtful, and that though he was very kind to me and kissed me 1,000 times more, I believe and he gave me my money too. Yet he offered no more all the while we were together, which was above 2 hours, and which I much wondered at, considering how it used to be, and what opportunities we had. I think I am actually going to pause here. Because I am starting to get a little bit of eye strain. I think I did pretty good for it being the first time reading aloud for so long again. And this is also as good a stopping point as any, considering there are no chapters on this. And I have a little marker there. Yeah, thank you. I'm going to turn, not all the way off, but I'm going to turn that down a little bit. I quite enjoyed this. I hope that everybody else enjoyed it. I forgot how much of this book is written in more of an Old English style. I'm definitely going to get the scuff worked out before tomorrow, so hopefully that means we will actually have Firebot working. But thank you everybody who came out to the stream and listened to the reading. I will have this available as a VOD for anybody who wants to listen. And yeah, this was the preface all the way through page 32 of Moll Flanders, if anybody wants to know. Thank you so very, very much. This is your friendly Water Buffalo signing off. We will see you tomorrow for our lovely friend stream, hopefully with the glitch, devout glitch, and ghetto. I am very much looking forward to our forest time. Alrighty. Thank you again. Everybody have a fantastic night. Bye-bye.